On this episode of Black in the Stacks, I chat with Dr. Shaundra Walker about the importance of HBCU libraries, the significance of HBCU Week, and her life working in academia. A proud HBCU graduate, Dr. Walker works as an academic library administrator and is also a professor of library science. She received the 2020 DEMCO Outstanding Librarian of the Year award from the Black Caucus of the American Library Association, authored grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities and National Endowment for the Arts, and co-edited the book, The Black Librarian in America, Reflections, Resistance, and Reawakening.
Well, thank you for joining me. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Sure. Thank you for reaching out. I was so excited when you reached out and everything. And then I got digging into your background and going and seeing all the publications you've done. I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be good. So
All right.
our listeners are in for a treat.
Okay.
Cool. So just tell us who you are and then tell us your library story. Like, how did you get into libraries? A little bit about your career background, all that good stuff.
Absolutely. So again, my name is Shaundra Walker. I have been in the library. I always say libraries in higher education for 25 years. I started on this journey back in 2000. Um, I'm currently serving in an administrative position in the academic library. And my journey to librarianship, my library story, I think is interesting. So I always tell people I had really positive experiences with the library as a child. My media specialists, K through 12, were always African American women. They really defied the librarian stereotype. So, particularly my elementary librarian, I remember her name was Gloria Turk Tuggle, and she lived across the street from my great aunt, who I didn't really understand the significance of this at the time, but she was like a club woman, and she was active with the National Council of Negro Women and educator like Miss Tuggle and all this kind of stuff. But Miss Tuggle was just like so fashionable, and she just had this really wonderful, witty personality. And I loved going to the media center, and that was very impressionable on me looking back. I don't think I noticed it with her, but with my high school librarian, I noticed that she had a copy of her degree in her office, and she went to Atlanta University, which I was vaguely familiar with. I had a relative who had attended graduate school there, and I was like, okay, that's interesting. So of course, I progressed through high school. My undergraduate degree is in history from Spelman College. And after graduation, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I applied to law school. I was accepted. I thought about it and I was like, I'm not quite sure that's what I want to do. And so I took some time. I was looking for a job and I saw a job advertised at the local university in my community for a librarian. And I was like, oh, I like the library. This sounds interesting. And so when I looked at the qualifications, it asked for this degree, this MLIS degree or MLS degree. And so I was like, okay, well, you know, this requires a degree. I need to get another degree. Who offers this degree? And I was surprised to learn that Clark Atlanta University offered a degree, which was like a stone's throw from the gates of Spelman College. Like you literally walk across the street and you're on Clark's campus. And I had never heard of it. So I applied. Um, the rest is history. So I enrolled at Clark Atlanta, progressed through that program. I actually started my career in public librarianship, but eventually made my way to academic librarianship. And that's pretty much what I've been in for the majority of my career. So that's my library story.
Cool. So I have a question.
Sure.
I think it's interesting to hear because almost everyone I've talked to has that sort of I thought I was going to do this and then I just wound up in librarianship
Mhm.
sort of story and everything. Um, but more interestingly is that you started in public, but then went into academic and just kind of stayed there.
Mhm.
Is there a reason why?
So when I was in library school, I worked part time. Oh no, actually, I worked full time at the DeKalb County Public Library. And growing up, my mom was really big on taking my siblings and I to the library. We were library users. I was that kid who used to write in my library books and get in trouble. But, I had experiences. I did summer reading. But when I worked for the public library, I worked for the Shamley branch, and we served a large immigrant population. And it really exposed me to a different kind of public library. Um, Once I graduated from library school, I moved back to my hometown of Macon. And at that time, the library wasn't quite doing the kinds of programming and outreach that I saw in DeKalb. And so I also don't think there were a lot of employment opportunities there, but I did see some academic library positions. I had an internship when I was in library school at Fort Valley State University, um, and so I kind of put my toenail in the water of academic librarianship when I was in grad school, and so I was like, okay, well, I need a job, so. Um, I saw some academic library positions and I started applying for those. And that's kind of how I got into academic librarianship and I liked it. And so I stayed in it.
Okay, cool. Going back to Clark Atlanta, your time there, when I found out about library school, and I did my little research and everything, Clark Atlanta was one of the ones that kind of popped up, because Google was still, I guess, trying to figure out like stuff. I don't know, but it popped up anyway, and so I got all excited, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go to Clark."
Mhm.
And my mentor went to Clark, and I'm just gonna. And then I got my heart broken because the program was no longer there. So can you can you tell me about your time at Clark, in the MLIS program, and just what that meant to you to be going from one HBCU to another?
Absolutely. So I if I had to do over, I wouldn't do anything differently. Like I literally feel like I was destined to go to Clark Atlanta University. I think what they were doing, although they didn't and don't always get the recognition that they deserve is they were very progressive in the type of education they provided in terms of just being culturally responsive. They were very, very progressive in terms of that. And I think about, some of the luminaries that I was able to work with there, some of the people that I was able to be touched by. It was just an awesome experience. If I had to do it over, again, I would do it 1,000 times. I think, the demise of the library education program at Clark Atlanta is something that has really intrigued me. So I graduated in 2002, and I think it closed around 2004, 2005. I can't quite remember the date. So I consider myself to be really fortunate to have come through that program before it closed. It was one of the most, even though its numbers were small, it was one of the most diverse library education programs in amongst all of the library schools. Like they were doing that, and that it wasn't that it was just all black. There were students of various ethnicities, faculty of various ethnicities. It was just a really, really rich program. And as I've grown as a librarian, as I've grown as a researcher, learned about some of the people that have come through there, Virginia Lacey Jones, um, others. I just feel really, really fortunate to have had that experience and to be grounded in that. One of the most impressionable experiences I had there was with one of my professors. His name is Dr. Ismail Abdullahi, and he introduced me to E.J. Josie, I'd never heard of. And he also introduced me to the Black Caucus, and that was very grounding for me as well. And so overall, I would just say it was a phenomenal program. One of the things that I'm looking to do in my research is really tease out why that program came to an end. I have some ideas, working on some research, but I think there's a story there that's very instructive, and I'm looking forward to shedding more light on it. So,
If our listeners haven't picked up on it by now, we are heavily talking about HBCUs, and we are recording this episode in
mhm,
honor of HBCU Week that's coming up.
mhm.
So, can you tell our listeners a little bit about HBCU Week, its history, and its importance?
Sure. So, HBCU Week comes out of an activity called the White House Initiative on HBCUs. It was established back in 1980 by Georgia's own President Jimmy Carter, and it's been continuously renewed under each presidential administration. And the purpose of it is really just to strengthen HBCUs, to identify best practices, and just to move them forward as institutions. And so I thought it'd be wonderful to just put in a plug for HBC libraries because they're so important and they often don't get the recognition they deserve.
Very true. Very true. So speaking of, how would you say the mission of an HBCU library differs from that of a PWI, predominantly white institution, academic library?
Sure. So I think it kind of goes back to the institutional mission for HBCUs, and then the library kind of comes out of that. I
Mhm.
know there's been a lot of discourse lately about HBCUs and about HBCU funding. I think there was an announcement last week about some funding being lost by organizations that serve large minority populations. Um, the thing that a lot of people don't realize about HBCUs is that that's a federal designation that comes from the federal government, comes out of the U.S. Higher Education Act. It's defined there, and HBCUs have that designation not necessarily based on their demographics, but on their mission. So if they're established to educate African Americans, regardless of their current demographic, that makes them eligible for some special categories of funding. For example, Title III-B funding, some funding for some of their physical facilities and that kind of thing. So it's really about the mission that they were established for that purpose of educating African Americans. And so I think if you go back to that in thinking about HBCU libraries, what I've discovered is very often, much in the same way that HBCUs are very community focused, the library is similarly community focused. For example, I previously worked at a HBCU, and community members would come in all the time. They wanted to use the computers. We provided them with help, regardless of whether or not they were students. And so it was a really um, different. That was at a land grant institution, which I think had a lot of influence on that dynamic. But I think there's that community piece, and then I think
Mm.
there's also that perspective that is really necessary to document that community's history. So the history of that institution, and to be a place where information about African American people and about our communities is readily available. And so I think that is the distinction. One of the articles I wrote, I can't remember, I think it's probably 2022 or 2023, talked about this criticism of HBCU libraries. This was, I think, in the 60s. And it talked about how everybody was saying they had a special collection, right? And this man was saying that those collections aren't special. They don't fit the true definition of a special collection. And I kind of argued against that
Mhm.
because those collections, what you'll often see is this really intentional stewardship and curation of African American materials. It's really a fascinating thing to see where these librarians who came before us meticulously collected these books by and about African Americans. And so there's a story there. And so while it may not be special in the traditional sense, I think what it does for that institution and what it does for that community, I think those collections also speak to the deficiencies in some of our cataloging and organization systems. So those Black librarians, people like in my previous institution, I want to call her name. Her name was Homie Regulus. Miss Regulus felt the need to pull those materials out from the margins, and she wanted to center them and put them in a place where they were accessible and where they received the visibility that they deserved. And so I think that's something that's true of many HBCU libraries, and I think it makes it a really distinctive attribute of those types of institutions.
Yeah, and the work that, our librarian predecessors did, it kind of shaped the way that we have specific institutions. I can't call it. I know it's in I want to say Tennessee, but there's a dedicated. I mean, there's several dedicated African American museums. The NEMAC in DC. There
Mhm,
are specialized, research facilities. Auburn Avenue Research Library in
mhm,
Atlanta,
mhm,
Schaumburg in New
mhm,
York. So yeah, I think within that realm, that's where those special, as we say,
mhm,
collections fit within HBCU libraries as well. Yeah.
mhm.
Um, so speaking of scholarly publications, you've written several. How do you continuously find things revolving around, I guess, librarianship, academia, Black history, Black futurism, just that realm? Like, where do you find stuff to continuously write about and research?
So, back in 2015, I earned my doctorate in higher education administration, and my dissertation was on um, a leadership program that was offered by an organization called the HBCU Library Alliance. So, as I was doing my work for that, I ran across like all this really, really interesting information. But the best dissertation is a done dissertation, right? So, I couldn't really within that talk about everything that I wanted to talk about, but there were just like bits and pieces, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna set that aside. I'm gonna come back to that. And so since then, I found myself, constantly revisiting those questions, constantly looking just for new veins and new avenues, paths that haven't been traveled previously, and just doing stuff that I find to be interesting, but still broadly connected to that topic of HBCU libraries and HBCU librarians.
Speaking of the HBCU Library Alliance, can you, in your opinion, tell us why such an organization even needed to be created? And then, secondly, your research about the leadership program. Can you talk about how the HBCU Library Alliance's leadership program lends itself to creating future library leaders?
Absolutely. So my dissertation again looked at the leadership development program for the HBCU Library Alliance. There were three iterations of that program. But what I discovered in my research is that historically, the HBCU library has been seen as um, an opportunity to improve HBCUs more broadly. And so, if you go back in history, what you'll see is this continuous investment of resources, often foundation resources or others, into HBCU libraries to develop their collections, to build their buildings. And so when you see the leadership program emerge, um, it is focusing on enhancing and advancing HBCUs through the library and through the leadership of those librarians. And so, in my opinion, it's just a reiteration of something that has happened over hundreds of years. It's the latest installment in that. But I think it really speaks to the potential of the library. Like if you improve the library and you give these people the resources and the services that they need, then we're going to see some institutional benefits from that. And I think that's really, really important. But it was not the first of its type. There have been several of those types of position of initiatives over the years, but there wasn't a lot about it in the literature, and I think there was also not a thread that kind of bound those different initiatives together, and so that's what I really want to do um, with my work. Speaking about the leadership piece, I think that's vitally important because if you've ever worked in the HBCU library, it is, I won't say everybody is this way, but a lot of their leaders are really, really passionate. Like, you may not have the resources that you need to be, you may not have resources like other institutions. So it really, you can be very, very passionate about that. And I think there's like some of our elders in the profession, some of our seasoned librarians um, Tasha Yeomans Lucas previously did her dissertation, and she identified what she referred to as a leadership crisis in HBCU libraries. That you had these really well-established, knowledgeable HBCU library leaders who were retiring and they were not being replaced. And so, if you think about the old adage, like if America has has a cold, Black America has the flu. So, when I was in library school and young and profession, there was this emerging thing about all the librarians are going to be retiring soon and who's going to come behind them. And so I was really interested in looking at, okay, if that's going to happen for the profession in the whole as a whole, that's probably going to be really, really acute for HBCUs. And so that's why I was really interested in that topic. I do believe that the programs collectively were very impactful. And I believe they're getting ready to launch a new iteration of the leadership program to continue that work. But I think that leadership is just so vitally important to the progression of those institutions and also the preservation of those collections and those materials. So.
I think the comparison to academic libraries versus public are almost parallel in that the very few African American leaders of public libraries are also gearing up for retirement.
Mhm.
And they are also not they're being replaced. They're just not being replaced with the people who look like the people who previously occupied it,
Mhm,
right?
mhm, mhm,
And I think that that is very intentional. I have thoughts on that, because the majority of my library career before I stepped away from traditional library work has been in public libraries.
okay,
Um, I've only ever worked for one African American director.
mhm,
Well, technically, technically only one, but they are very different
mhm,
um, in the leadership style, in the attempt to champion and mentor
mhm,
someone to come behind them. And as much of a fight as I think those directors in the public realm put up to make sure that someone comes behind them that looks like them, um, it's often they fall short, right? Like no
mhm,
matter how hard they fight to get a me or a you to come
mhm,
behind them because we look like them, we think like them, we have experienced some similar, microaggressions and
mhm.
macroaggressions the way that they have. So we get it, we understand it, we have that um, just ancestral connection, if you will. Um, it's almost like library boards have their own intentions and have their own ideals of what they want the library to look like. And so they hire based on that and not necessarily what's good for the staff who has served this previous director, and definitely not in the best interest of the community that that library serves.
That's really interesting because, growing up, I saw African American librarians in my school, my K through 12, and I saw them at my college library, but I really didn't see them represented in the public library realm. So that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that before.
Mhm,
But the African American public librarians that I do know, they tend to work in larger systems, like larger metropolitan systems, but not so much in smaller, less populous areas. So yeah.
mhm, yeah. How do you see your role as previously being an associate professor and now as a library administrator influencing your approach to student success and academic support?
So um that is a really interesting question. So I would say that now that I'm a full, I progressed from associate to full. I'm still like active with my scholarship and active in the profession and stuff, but I don't, for lack of a better way to say it, I don't have as much to prove anymore. And
Okay.
so I can be a lot more focused
Mhm,
on specific things. Um, one thing that I'm really interested in is open access, open education broadly. So open access materials, open educational resources, and open data. I think there's a tremendous potential there. Um, just really thinking about creative and innovative ways to remove barriers to the library, but also to higher education in general. And so that's something that I'm really interested in. I think a lot of times people are not really aware, or they're very limited in their thinking about the potential of the library and what the library can actually do. I joke all the time. I say people think when you say work at the library, they think you play with books all day. That is
Hmm.
absolutely not what I do. So, just thinking about this week, I have met with a furniture vendor. I just met with someone this morning about um, sharing some of our student research. I'll be going to a meeting this afternoon to talk about an exhibit. I'm setting up a meeting with talk about some of our donor stuff. So it's a very dynamic role, but and it can be very challenging and very time consuming. But I really appreciate the opportunity to move things forward and to see progress. Um, I think sometimes progress is observed over time, and so I recognize that some of the things that I'm trying to do um, to promote student success or just to support our services and resources may not really, the impact may not be evident, for a long time. And I'm okay. I'm okay with that. I just try to do, the best I can in the time that I'm here, and that's about it. So,
Yeah, I mean, that's all we can do these
yeah.
days. Has there ever been a moment where a student, or anybody really, profoundly impacted by something in your library, where whether it was a display, a collection, an event, in anything like that? If there is, can you tell us about it, and then what part, if any, you played in that?
So, um, I can think of a couple of examples, but the one that I think is particularly relevant is that, I've talked a lot about my upbringing and being exposed to librarianship um, from a young child, and seeing someone who came from my community who was able to really find fulfillment in the career. I would say that the representation is probably the way that I've been most impactful. I started my professional career back in 2002. And I remember two of my student workers who I worked with, loved working with them. I was a new professional. We were all learning together. They went on to become librarians. One of them is a librarian in Los Angeles, and the other one is a school librarian, I think, here in Georgia. And so I think my impact has most been felt just by people seeing me in this profession and seeing me really do some things that you wouldn't necessarily expect, or to not tap into that librarian stereotype, or you know people think like with your research you're going to be writing about the books, because so many people's thought process about the libraries is very book centric. And so, if you're talking about some other topics, talking about, librarians, their careers, whatever, I think that it has served to um, show people what a wonderful profession this is, and how full and rewarding it can be. And I think when people see you enjoying it and expanding it and, pushing it to its limits, what it could be or what it should be, it's been inspiring. So I think about just the letters for library school that I've written and for scholarships, and you know, um, I always say I want to lift as I climb. So if I benefited from something, then I'm going to say, hey, you should try this. Here's an organization you may want to get involved in. Here's a conference scholarship. Whatever. I think that's probably one of the ways that I've been really impactful in my career. And I'm looking forward to doing more of that.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me when I have people who have reached out to me to write letters on their behalf,
Hmm.
or to just be references and stuff, because at the time, I didn't consider myself to be at that caliber yet.
Mhm, mhm,
Like I felt like I still had a ways to go. And in in some ways I do still have some growing to do and exploration in this field. Like I it comes up often, but there are a lot of people who kind of meet me and they're like, "Oh, what are you doing now?" and this and that, or they've like looked me up and they're like, "Well, why aren't you still in libraries?" And I
mhm.
was like, "There's not enough time in the world to explain that." But I do stuff like this. I do,
Mhm,
my TikTok stuff that keeps me connected to that world.
mhm,
Um, but yeah, I it's very weird. And then I was, I guess I am technically some people's mentor.
mhm,
That's
mhm.
what they call me. I was like, if you say so, sure. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting to see, I guess, my growth in that,
Mhm, mhm,
which I'm sure you can relate to as well.
mhm. Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, are there any in your current library, are there any sort of like special materials or archives that are unique in the way of preserving Black history and culture?
Sure. So, 3 or 4 years ago, I was the PI on an NEH funded project called Documenting. It's basically documenting the African American history of the town where my college is located. And through that project, we were able to collect various community artifacts. We scanned those and provided a copy of the scans to the community member. If they wanted to, they could donate a copy to digitized copy to the library. Um, we uploaded those materials into several online repositories. So they're in the Digital Library of Georgia. They're also in the Digital Public Library of America. And one of the things I'm most proud of is we put together a traveling exhibit. Um, and that is available to circulate in our community. And so, people don't, we love it if they do come over, but if they don't come over, they can engage with that content within the community. And so that's kind of a gap that I saw in our archives. And I was like, okay, well, what can we do about this?
Mhm.
And we did it and still got some buzz about it. It just came back from traveling to one of the local churches. And so I think that's the thing that one of the things that I'm most proud of about my time here. So
So, you have a panel coming up in October at Morehouse College called The Black Liberal Arts Tradition, HBCU Libraries and Archives, and Black Memory Workers. Can you give our listeners a sneak peek of what they can expect to hear from you and others on the panel to encourage them to attend?
absolutely. So I am super, super excited about it feels kind of like going home in a sense. Although I didn't go to Morehouse. I did go to Spelman, but just to be on that um part of that symposium is just a great honor. So I'm really looking forward to that. My colleagues who will be joining me are Holly Smith, um, my sister colleague. She is the archivist at Spelman College. And then we'll also be joined by Dr. Aisha Johnson, who is the Associate Dean of Academic Affairs and Outreach at Georgia Tech. So really, really looking forward to that. So the call for proposals for the symposium really tapped into some things that I had been ruminating on. I mentioned in the proposal Jelani Faber's book. He talks about this concept of a second curriculum at HBCUs and how it inspired a generation of just thought leaders and people who were very culturally grounded in their work. And so I was thinking, how does that play in the library and how is that represented in the library? And so, thinking about some of the people who have become before us who received that grounding. I mentioned earlier Dr. E.J. Josie, who graduated from Howard. You have, uh, gosh, her name is escaping me right now, is at Fisk. Forever. Her name is going to come back to me. But you think about these trailblazers in the library profession, and one of the common experiences that they have is this HBCU experience, often a HBCU liberal arts experience. And so having a conversation about what was the impact of that on their praxis, because these were people who could have just stepped into librarianship and just said, I'm just going to be this middle of the road library director, this library leader, but they decided to do something different. And so that common thread of that HBCU experience as an undergraduate, in some instances as a graduate student, how did that impact and influence their work? And so we're going to touch on that a bit. We're also going to look at some very specific examples of that. And so I'm really, really looking forward to that conversation. I think, again, we opened up talking about those collections at HBCU libraries. I believe that there's often a unique opportunity, particularly at the undergraduate level, for undergraduates to be immersed in those collections, whether it's the book collection, whether it's the manuscripts or whatever, to be an undergraduate, be 18, 22 years old, and to be on a campus where you can literally go and see the King papers or to see the Audre Lorde papers or, you know, that in for everything that HBCUs might lack. I think that's something that's very, very unique and very, very special to the HBCU experience. And our memory workers, whether they're librarians or archivists or whatever, they're very central to that. And so I'm really looking forward to that conversation coming up next month.
Hmm. And because I know people will ask, is it going to be live streaming anywhere?
I don't believe that it will be,
Okay.
but it is supposed to be. They're going to select some of the presentations for conference proceedings, and so it's going to come out as a publication. And so I'm knock on wood, hopeful that we will be one of those. But yeah, I'm really, really excited about the opportunity again, just to go home to the Atlanta University Center that has been so impactful in my both my personal and professional journey. So I'm really, really excited about that. And then I can talk about HBCUs and HBCU libraries till the cows come home. So I'm excited about that too.
Okay. Yeah. And just as a reminder, it is October 10th,
Mhm,
right? At the Black Liberal Arts Tradition
mhm,
Symposium at
mhm.
Morehouse College.
That is
There we go.
correct. Mhm.
See, I plugged it. She didn't plug it. So there. Look at
Thank
that.
you, thank
Okay.
you, thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Yeah.
Um, so my last, I guess, HBCU week focus question is just where do you see HBCU libraries heading in the next couple of years? And then what role will they play in the future of higher education as things play out like you mentioned earlier with funding and all of that.
Very, very interesting question. You know, we often toss around this term. I first encountered it with the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. This idea of a culture keeper, and so I think HBCU libraries traditionally have been culture keepers. HBCU librarians have been culture keepers. I think that role is going to become even more significant going forward. And yeah, I think it's just going to be imperative to continue to build those collections, to maintain those collections. I want to give a shout out to another project, not necessarily grounded in HBCUs, but more broadly. It's called Archive in the Black Web.
Mhm.
Um, the lead on that project is Makiba Foster, who's at Worcester University, I think in Ohio. But I think the significance of those types of projects is going to be magnified. So yes, archiving and maintaining traditional, but also quote unquote new media is going to become even more important. A central aspect of that project is in training for people who are in HBCU libraries and in other libraries about archiving. some of these spaces. Like, you think about during the pandemic, everybody was doing this online programming, right? Everybody's church was online.
Mhm.
Where's that content going to be down the road? Or, you think about some of the Black spaces that have traditionally existed, like Black Planet. Who's making sure
Mhm.
that Black Planet is preserved for posterity? So I think those types of projects are going to become even more important. Um, HBCU librarians have always risen to the challenge. And so um, I have no doubt that they'll be able to continue to do the wonderful work that they've done to preserve those collections and preserve those histories. Um, I know they can do it.
And we'll be there, all of us library supporters, whether public, academic, special,
Exactly.
medical, whatever, to be there to support them in that journey. So yeah. So I have just a couple of questions that I always ask my guests when we come to the end. But before I do that, is there anything else about HBCU Week that you want to express or encourage people to get involved in before I ask my final questions?
Sure. I guess what I would encourage people to do is just to learn more about HBCUs. HBCU Week has served to shine a light on them, but there are a lot of misconceptions about them out there. So, like, people um, don't understand the designation, perhaps, or they may confuse them with other types of minority serving institutions. So, I would say if there's HBCU in your community or HBCU alums, learn more about them. They're a really, really special type of institution. We HBCUs have been getting a lot of shine lately, and I hope that continues. But I would just really encourage people to just learn more about them. They're not a monolith. They're very they are a very diverse group of institutions. For example, people think if you have majority Black enrollment, that means you're HBCU. It actually doesn't, and there are a couple of HBCUs that don't have majority Black enrollments, like West Virginia State, Bluefield,
Mhm.
Lincoln in Missouri. But because they were founded with that express intent to educate African Americans at the right date, they are designated as HBCU. So I just encourage people to learn more about them. They're wonderful, they're diverse. And yeah, that I would leave you with that.
So, what creative works are currently occupying your time? Like, what are you engaging in to kind of decompress from your day?
So I love gardening, indoor gardening. I really
Mhm.
got into gardening during the pandemic. And so I love, going home, looking at my plant babies, trying to see what they need, fussing at them because they're not growing. So
Mhm.
I would say that is a creative endeavor that I'm engaged in. Um, we talked a little bit earlier about the leadership. It doesn't really leave a whole lot of time for extra pursuits. Um, but I still do some things from time to time. Earlier this week, I wrote a book review about this wonderful book edited by Dr. Nicole Cook about Black women in librarianship. It's got a afterword by Dr. Aisha Jones Johnson. I mean Aisha Johnson. Um, so doing more of those, types of things, not necessarily creatively.
Mhm.
Um, quiet as a skip. If you were to see me personally, I love. I'm very much into like trying to think of the right way to describe it, but this whole black girl or black woman aesthetic, just like
Mhm.
the history of it. So I'm very deep in my 80s bag right now, just collecting um, artifacts and things. I
Mhm.
love like beauty culture, and so that's something that I'm really interested in. Um, don't do a whole lot of reading, but trying to do a little bit, little bit more, and some traveling. Um, yeah, so that's my non-library life a bit.
Cool. What is one thing you will always be proud of?
Hmm. Let's see. What is the one thing I would be really proud of? I would say that. Um, One thing I'm really, really proud of is it's a work related thing, but it's a book project that I worked on a couple of years ago. Um, it was a collaborative effort. A couple of three other African American librarian colleagues and I came together to co-edit a book called "The Black Librarian in America." It started. The first one I think was published like in the '70s, and so there have been like these various iterations of that book. Edison that was just like one of the hallmarks of my professional career. Um, because when I was a little bitty baby librarian, um, I often would turn to those books. So, The Black Librarian in America, The Handbook of Black Librarianship, like reading those stories of people about their work and about their experience kept me in the profession a lot of times when I wanted to leave. And so to be involved in a related project that I hope will be as inspirational, that is something that I'm just really, really proud of having had the opportunity to carry that tradition on. So yeah, I would say that is the thing I'm probably most proud of.
What's the most surprising thing you've learned about yourself?
Hmm. Let's see. What is the most? I would say that I probably have an old soul. Um, I really do feel like I was destined to be a librarian. Um, so just the collecting, the the opportunity to look at things retrospectively, um, I've learned that about myself over time that I really do feel like I'm doing what I was destined to do. That I was always supposed to do this. I was always supposed to go by Clark Atlanta. I was always um there was a reason, Miss Tuggle had that influence on me. Like I was really, really destined to do this. And I think as I come close to the end of my career and looking back, it's a real full circle journey. And so just, sitting back and looking back over the years, I wouldn't take anything from my journey now. I love the work that I do. It's new every day. It's exciting. It's challenging. But I love it. And, I feel like for Black women, librarianship has been a space for a particular type of Black woman. Like I think historically, in terms of professions, Black women have been very limited in their professional careers and what they've been able to do. And a lot of us became teachers and educators and that kind of thing. But then you have librarianship over here, which is very related to education, but it's also distinct in and of
Mhm.
itself. And so, um, again, I I like to push the boundaries for librarianship and to explore everything that it can be for me, both personally and professionally. So,
Um, Lastly, if such a thing exists, what does life after libraries look like for you?
oh, life after libraries. So I would say I'm getting very interested in historic preservation. Um, that's something that I'm kind of dabbling in now. So, um, particularly African American historic preservation in my local community. So I could kind of sort of see myself doing that. More travel. I love to spend time with my family, um, my nieces and nephews. I have a new great niece who was just born about 2 weeks ago. So
Mhm.
Auntie is looking forward to spoiling her. um, on the weekends, and expect to do more of this in the future. Again, people look at me and not believe this, but like I'm that high school football person. I'm out there, stands. One of my nephews plays in the band, so I got football band. All the things that the kids are doing. So I'm really invested in my family and just building the next generation. Also, very interested in philanthropy. And so I'm looking to establish a scholarship. So, those kinds of things, really thinking about what my legacy is going to be, both professionally and personally. So,
And then lastly, if any of our listeners wanted to kind of connect with you, apart from this podcast, where can they find you online?
Sure. So you can find me online, both on Instagram and Threads at Shaundra.Walker. It's SHAUNDRA dot Walker. So either one of those profiles, I pop out there every now and then. So yeah, let's connect. Also on LinkedIn. So yeah, send me a connection request. I love meeting new people.
Cool, sounds good. Well, thank you so much. I mean, we could keep this going for another couple of hours, but I know you are busy, so I will not hold you hostage with that. But thank you so much for talking with me today. It's been great.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the work that you do. I love a good podcast, and so I was so excited when I ran across your content, and so please give us more. Please give us more. Looking forward to seeing the growth of the podcast too.
Thank you. Thank you.
All righty.
For more information, you can visit us online at www.blackinthestacks.com and find us on most social media platforms at Black in the Stacks.